What would you do if the child you took in to protect turned out to be the only one capable of saving you from the people you trusted most? The orange juice sat on the table, sweating in the California sun. Its condensation rolled down the sides, catching the morning light like crystal. Julian Carter reached for it, fingers brushing the cold glass. He had a meeting in an hour, a pitch to finalize, a call with investors waiting. But for now, this was just breakfast in his quiet home. Until a small voice broke the calm. "Don't drink that," she whispered. He turned. Standing in the doorway was Jasmine Carter, 9 years old, slight as a shadow, dressed in the same worn pink hoodie she wore almost every day. She didn't move closer. She didn't raise her voice. But her words dropped like a stone in still water. Julian froze, the glass hovering an inch from his lips. "You mean this?" he asked, trying to sound amused. "Did I steal your juice by mistake?" She shook her head slowly. "It smells like the stuff they gave us back at the center. The kind that made you forget things." The light in the breakfast nook suddenly felt too bright. Julian glanced toward the kitchen, where Evelyn Blake, his fiancée, moved with practiced ease, humming softly as she arranged fruit. The sound of her heels clicking against the marble echoed like a metronome of a life too perfectly timed. "She made it," he said, half a question, half a deflection. Jasmine only nodded. Her eyes never left the glass. Julian smiled, the kind of smile people in boardrooms use when they're hiding panic behind charm. "You've got quite the imagination," he said, reaching out to gently tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. She didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. "Just don't drink it," she whispered. Then she turned and walked away, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished tile. He watched the door close behind her. Then he stared at the glass, and he didn't drink it. That night, Julian stood alone in his office. The stars outside the tall windows blinked against the California night. Inside, the silence pressed in. He hadn't said anything to Evelyn. She'd kissed his cheek, asked if he wanted more juice, smiled that disarming, practiced smile. But he couldn't unhear Jasmine's warning. He hadn't touched the glass. Instead, he'd poured it down the sink, slowly, deliberately, like it might explode if moved too fast. He told himself it was paranoia, that Jasmine had misunderstood something. That trauma from her years in foster care made her overly cautious. But the more he tried to convince himself, the louder her voice echoed. That smell. That whisper. That warning. He turned on the security logs, checked the home's smart network. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then he saw it, a device pinging softly from the hallway near the guest room. Not one of the standard routers, not a thermostat, not a fridge. Something small, unregistered. Active. Julian's breath caught. He remembered Jasmine's face. The calm in her eyes. The way she hadn't begged, hadn't cried, hadn't even explained. She'd just spoken and waited to be believed. The next morning, Jasmine was already in the kitchen when he came down. She sat on the bar stool, stirring oatmeal in slow, even circles. Julian poured his own coffee. "Morning," he said, trying to sound casual. She nodded. "I didn't drink it," he added, quieter. She didn't look up. "I know," she said. He sat across from her. "Would you show me what you meant? About how you knew?" Jasmine blinked. Then, slowly, she nodded. Outside, the sun rose over the hills of Palo Alto. But inside, something more important began, not a shift in power, but in trust. Later that day, Julian watched Jasmine from the doorway of his office. She sat cross-legged on the rug, sketching code onto her old tablet. She wasn't doing anything dramatic. Just existing. Quietly. Completely. And yet, there was something in the way she looked around, small, practiced glances. The kind of awareness you only develop when the world has hurt you before. "Do you always notice everything?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Mostly," she said. "It's how I know if I'm safe." The words hit him like a punch to the ribs. He crossed the room and sat near her. "You said the juice smelled like something from the group home." She nodded. "They called it quiet time. Gave us juice. We got sleepy. I learned how to fake it." Her voice was steady, not bitter. Just true. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn scrap of paper. "I found this in the hallway closet, tucked behind a photo frame." Jasmine took it. Her eyes scanned the faded symbols, strings of ones and zeros. "It's binary," she said, and sort of. "One of the foster dads played games with encryption mods. He didn't know I was watching." Her fingers moved across her tablet. "This is a MAC address." "A device, not yours." Julian blinked. Someone had hidden it. And Jasmine had found it, not because she was lucky, but because she had been trained by survival. That night, Julian sat on the edge of his bed. The untouched juice from the day before still sat in his office fridge. He hadn't thrown it away. Not yet. He stared at it, and then he smiled. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one whisper, to save everything. Julian Carter had built firewalls most hackers couldn't even dream of breaking. But the one person who slipped past all his defenses? A quiet 9-year-old girl who barely said a word when she moved in. Jasmine Carter wasn't his daughter, not by blood. She wasn't even officially adopted yet. But ever since he brought her home from that government-run foster center 6 weeks ago, something had shifted. Not loudly, not quickly, but deeply. He remembered the first time he saw her, a cracked tablet in her hands, code scrawled on a notepad beside her. She was seated cross-legged on a plastic mat in a dingy corner, headphones taped together at the ear. She wasn't playing games. She was inside his company's public-facing firewall, and she had found a vulnerability. The IT team tracked the breach to a second-hand IP registered to a group home. Julian had gone there himself, thinking it was some punk with too much time. Instead, he found Jasmine small, watchful, and impossible to read. When he asked her how she found the flaw, she shrugged. "I noticed it, that's all. No bragging, no fear. Just fact." Julian didn't know what compelled him to bring her home. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something deeper, the same something that hadn't left him since his own daughter Erin passed away 4 years ago. Erin had been 8. She liked daffodils and puzzles. She never got the chance to turn 9. Jasmine didn't talk about her past. She didn't ask for toys or candy, didn't scream, cry, or slam doors, but she did notice everything. She knew when Evelyn changed the brand of coffee Julian drank. She knew which plants in the garden were real and which were silk. She could tell when the thermostat dipped even 1 degree. Julian used to think it was just a quirk. Now, after the juice, he saw it differently. It wasn't a quirk. It was a survival mechanism. That week, Julian watched her more carefully. Not in a creepy way, just attentively. He noticed how she folded her napkin exactly in half, how she always checked under her pillow before going to sleep, how she paused every single time before walking into a new room, even in his house. He saw it, and it broke his heart. "Did you ever have a real family?" he asked one evening over dinner. Jasmine didn't look up from her spaghetti. "Define real," she said. Julian smiled softly. "You know what I mean." She twirled her fork. "There was a lady once," she murmured. "Miss Thelma. She worked in the kitchen at one of the homes. She used to make French toast on Sundays, and she hummed gospel songs." Julian waited. "She didn't work there long," Jasmine added. "Why not?" "They said she was too kind. Thought she was making the girls soft." Julian's jaw clenched. Jasmine looked up at him for a beat. "That was the closest I ever had to family." Later that night, Julian stood in the hallway, watching her through the half-open door. She was curled under a fleece blanket, her old tablet charging on the nightstand. The glow of the charging light pulsed softly in the dark. He thought about Erin. About how he used to peek in on her just like this. How he'd watch the gentle rise and fall of her chest, her bunny plush tucked under one arm. He thought about how silent the house had become after she was gone, and how Jasmine's presence, subtle, guarded, had begun to breathe life back into it. The next morning, Julian made pancakes. They were a little burnt. Okay, maybe more than a little. He wasn't much of a cook. Jasmine didn't say a word, just quietly pushed her syrup to the edge of her plate so it didn't touch the eggs. "You always eat like that?" he asked. She shrugged. "Some places didn't let us mix food." "Some kids had allergies." Julian nodded. Then, with hesitation, he asked, "Do you like living here?" Jasmine looked at him, long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then she said, very simply, "I feel safer." Julian didn't press further, didn't ask for hugs or gratitude or even trust. He just nodded and poured her another glass of orange juice. This time, he made it himself. Later that day, Miss Thelma, the family's longtime housekeeper, returned from a trip to see her sister. She'd known Julian since before his company IPO'd. She had held baby Erin in her arms, and when she met Jasmine, she smiled in that warm Sunday morning kind of way. "Child," she said, "I see you." Jasmine didn't say much in return, but that night, she let Miss Thelma brush out her braids, and that meant more than any word could. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Julian stood on the back porch, a mug of coffee in hand. Jasmine came out quietly and sat beside him. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, out of nowhere. Julian exhaled. "Because you reminded me of someone, but also because you didn't try to impress me." She tilted her head. "And because I saw how smart you were, and how alone." Jasmine didn't reply, but after a few moments, she leaned her head lightly against his arm. Just for a second, then she sat up again like nothing had happened, but Julian stood still for a long time afterward. Because for the first time in years, he felt like someone had come home. It started with a flicker, not in the lights, not on the cameras, but in the network. Julian Carter was reviewing system diagnostics on a quiet Wednesday night, sipping lukewarm coffee in his home office, when something odd caught his eye. A signal, not strong, not loud, but off. A pulse from somewhere in the second-floor hallway. It wasn't a device he recognized. Not the thermostat, not the guest router, not the fridge. Not the TV. Something else, something small. Something hiding. He leaned closer to the screen, narrowing the scan window. Still there. A MAC address not tied to any of the house's authorized devices. He checked the serial against his inventory list. Nothing. No one else should have been online at that hour. Miss Thelma had gone to bed. Jasmine was in her room, curled up with her tablet and a detective novel from the school library. And Evelyn? She had said she was taking a long bath. Julian didn't want to jump to conclusions. He was a man of logic, of process, but something in his gut, something ancient and instinctual, tightened. He tapped into the internal camera feeds. Most rooms were quiet. Then his eyes landed on the guest room, the one Evelyn had decorated with soft white linens and a marble vase for when her friends stayed over. It wasn't occupied now, but the motion sensor had pinged, just 20 minutes ago. He moved through the house quietly, bare feet on cold hardwood. The hallway creaked beneath his steps. He passed Jasmine's room, soft breathing, a small reading lamp still on. He reached the guest room. It smelled faintly of lavender and linen spray. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. He stepped inside. The vase caught his eye. It wasn't quite centered on the dresser. Julian lifted it. It was heavier than it should have been. He tilted it gently. Under the polished stones at the bottom, nestled like a parasite, was a small black dot, no larger than a coin. A listening device, live. His hand shook. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring, breathing, processing. Then carefully, he placed the vase back. He didn't disable the bug. Not yet. Instead, he turned and walked back toward his office, every step now measured, calculated. He shut the door behind him and picked up his phone. But he didn't call security. He called Jasmine. She arrived 2 minutes later in socks, her tablet tucked under one arm. He didn't explain. He just handed her a piece of paper. The MAC address. She blinked, then nodded slowly. "That's not a home device," she said. "I know. You think it's Evelyn." "I don't want to think it," he admitted. "But I also didn't want to think my best friend was hiding things either." Jasmine looked up. "Logan?" Julian nodded grimly. Maybe both." That night, neither of them slept. While Miss Thelma made chamomile tea and tried to act like everything was normal, Julian and Jasmine sat cross-legged on the rug, mapping out signal activity, checking timestamps, tracing shadow connections on the internal mesh network. And at 2:13 a.m., Jasmine found something. "Here," she said, pointing at a spike from 2 nights ago. "The signal was strongest when Evelyn was in the study." Julian leaned over her shoulder. "You're sure?" "I don't guess," she said quietly. The next morning, the house looked the same. Sunlight on the tile floors, Evelyn humming in the kitchen, fresh fruit on the table, pancakes on the griddle. But everything felt off. Julian poured his own coffee that morning, made sure Evelyn wasn't the one serving. When she kissed him on the cheek and asked, "Sleep okay, darling?" he smiled like nothing was wrong. But inside, the walls were moving. After breakfast, Miss Thelma pulled Julian aside. She rarely interrupted him. But her voice was low, urgent. "Something I should mention, sir." "What is it?" "Yesterday morning. I came in early." Evelyn was already in the study. Julian's heart skipped. She said she couldn't sleep, but she wasn't reading or on her laptop. "She was standing near your desk, looking through the drawers." He swallowed hard. "You sure? I've cleaned that room for years." She didn't belong where she was standing. That afternoon, Julian confronted Jasmine. "Tell me everything." She hesitated. Then she nodded. 2 weeks ago, she offered me a new tablet." Julian blinked. "She never mentioned that." "I didn't take it." "Why?" "Because the box was already open." Julian exhaled sharply. "She also asked me once if I liked living here," Jasmine continued. "But it didn't feel warm. It felt like she was testing me." Testing her. Like a liability. Not a child. Julian sat back in his chair, hands clasped, eyes burning with betrayal. "How did I miss it all?" "Because you trusted her," Jasmine said softly. Julian looked at her. "And you?" "I watch people." A pause. "People don't always mean what they say." "But their eyes, their hands, the way they move in a room, that's the real part." He felt something break open in his chest. Guilt. Grief. Rage. But also clarity. That evening they began planning quietly, deliberately. Jasmine mapped the signal sources. Julian listed every device Evelyn had ever touched. Miss Thelma walked through the house with a notebook, recalling every change, every moved vase, every new picture frame Evelyn brought in. And together, the three of them began building something new. A countermeasure, a trap, a quiet war fought in silence. And in the center of it all, not Julian, the CEO, not the FBI, but a 9-year-old girl who refused to look away. Some wars aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with silence and patience. And a child who refuses to be fooled. That night, as the house around them slept, Julian Carter, Jasmine, Miss Thelma, gathered in the study with nothing but a lamp, a notepad, and the truth. It was time to fight back. But they wouldn't do it loudly. They'd do it smart. Julian began by pulling up the blueprint of the estate's smart system. Every router, every sensor, every device Evelyn had ever connected to. Miss Thelma pointed out what had changed recently. That new clock, Evelyn insisted, would tie the room together. The decorative mirror she hung in the hallway, for light, she said. And of course, the birthday gift, the marble vase. Julian shook his head. She used my birthday to plant a listening device. Jasmine was quiet. Then she said, "That's not the only one." Over the next hour, Jasmine ran a full sweep of the house with a signal sniffer app she'd modified herself. She moved like a shadow, tablet in hand, stopping at certain corners, listening, scanning, checking signal strength. In the living room, something inside the antique clock. In Julian's office, a faint pulse behind the painting on the far wall. In his bedroom, a sharp ping from the nightstand drawer. Julian's stomach turned. "She bugged my room," he whispered.
"She's not just spying," Jasmine said. "She's collecting." "Collecting what?" "Moments. Weakness. Leverage."
Julian wanted to rip every device out and confront Evelyn that second, but Jasmine stopped him. "No," she said. "We don't expose her yet." Julian frowned. "Why not?" "Because she's careful, but not that careful. She's still using the network, still collecting." "We need proof?" Jasmine nodded. "Hard proof. Traceable. Unmistakable." So they laid a trap. Julian created a mirror version of his company's most valuable project, the adaptive encryption layer. The copy looked real. Same folder structure, same metadata. But the code? It was junk, carefully designed junk, laced with invisible tracer tags. "If she tries to access or copy this," Julian said, "we'll know when, where, and how." Jasmine added, "And we'll know who she sends it to." Miss Thelma took care of the house. She moved like she always did, dusting, folding, humming quietly. But now, she also watched. Evelyn's schedule. Her late-night tea breaks, the moments she lingered near Julian's desk when no one was looking. Jasmine called it patterning. "If we know her pattern," she explained, "we can predict the moment she acts." The second layer of the trap came from Jasmine herself. She installed signal interceptors, small, harmless-looking modules that piggybacked onto the house's electrical lines. They couldn't stop the data from being stolen, but they could watch it go. Every USB inserted, every remote login attempt, every outbound transmission. She'd built a silent alarm system not for the house, but for its trust. That Friday, Evelyn announced she had yoga at 6:30 p.m., the same class she went to every week. She kissed Julian goodbye and floated out the door like always, but this time, she didn't leave through the main gate. A sensor on the side patio caught her slipping back in. 30 minutes later, a signal lit up from the guest room. "She's in," Jasmine whispered, eyes locked on her screen. "She's opening the decoy folder." Julian felt his breath catch. Seconds later, a data transfer alert pinged. "She inserted a USB," Jasmine said calmly. "She's copying the prototype. And then she just sent it." "To who?" "Outbound trace shows Frankfurt, then Singapore. Masked servers." Julian exhaled slowly. "Whoever's receiving it is ready." Then Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "Wait, there's a reply." Julian leaned in. "What does it say?" She read aloud, voice flat. "Phase 2 confirmed. Final insertion. Tomorrow. Target destabilized." Miss Thelma, standing behind them, crossed herself quietly. "They think they've won," she murmured. Julian stared at the screen. "They're not even close." That night, as the house settled into its staged calm, Jasmine sat cross-legged in her room, triple-checking every node. Julian knocked gently. "You still up?" She nodded. "Couldn't sleep." He entered and sat beside her. You shouldn't have to carry this much, he said.
You're 9. Jasmine looked at him, her voice soft but firm. I was 7 when I started noticing people lie. It's not that heavy anymore. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Julian asked, Do you think she suspects anything? She's confident, Jasmine said. Dangerous people usually are. Julian nodded. And you? Do you trust me? Jasmine paused. I trust facts, she said. Then, almost smiling. But yeah, I think I trust you too. The next evening, Evelyn floated through the kitchen in her cream silk robe, slicing grapefruit, humming to a jazz playlist like always. Julian smiled, pretended, mimicked routine. Jasmine sat at the breakfast nook, fake scrolling cartoons on her tablet. In reality, she was watching the signal interceptors. She tapped her Bluetooth mic. She's here, Jasmine whispered, and so is the signal. 2 devices. One pulsing, one active. They're listening right now. Julian took a long sip of his own coffee brewed by himself and smiled faintly. Good to know. The trap was live, and the next move would be theirs. There are betrayals that sting. Then there are betrayals that cut so deep you don't even feel them right away. They just stay inside you. Until someone whispers the truth, and the pain finally hits. Julian Carter had known Logan Pierce for over 20 years. They'd built Bennett Secure Tech together out of ramen dinners, sleepless nights, and wild ambition. If there was anyone Julian would have bet his life on, it was Logan, his friend, his co-founder, his brother in everything but blood. But now he wasn't so sure. It started with a sentence, one that Jasmine had said so quietly it almost didn't register. They were reviewing the intercepted transmission Evelyn had sent. Julian had asked, who else could be involved? Jasmine had shrugged, then murmured, He's been here when you weren't. Julian looked up. Who? Logan, she said. I saw him last week, in your office, with Evelyn. Julian's chest tightened. He didn't want to believe it. Couldn't. But the more he looked backward, the more it started to make sense. Logan was always there at the right moment, or was it the wrong moment? He'd walk in just as Julian closed his laptop, offer help managing files, suggest cleaning up digital backups. He was the one who'd first recommended Vanessa for a consulting role on the foundation board. Back then, it seemed thoughtful. Now, it felt like a setup. Julian didn't confront him immediately. Instead, he set another trap. He called Logan. Need to meet, Julian said. Something big. Sensitive. Logan responded like always casual, confident. You rang, partner. They agreed on lunch at the estate the next afternoon. Meanwhile, Jasmine got to work. She rigged the guest hallway with surveillance, not just cameras, but sound triangulation tools. She also programmed a passive device sniffer. It would flag any burner phones connecting to the internal mesh. At 11:42 a.m., one pinged. Not Julian's, not Evelyn's. Jasmine tracked it to the porch, and right on cue, Logan Pierce stepped out of his black Porsche grinning, waving, the same swagger he always carried. Inside, Julian greeted him like nothing was wrong. They talked about market shifts, press buzz, upcoming investor calls. Then Julian leaned back in his chair. I'm making a change. Logan raised an eyebrow. To the prototype? Julian nodded. Too many eyes on it. I'm building a decoy version. Just in case. Logan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Cautious. I like it. From the secret feed in the guest hallway, Jasmine and Miss Thelma watched everything. Jasmine leaned forward. He smiled too much, she said. Miss Thelma frowned. He always does. No, Jasmine whispered. But this time, it didn't reach his eyes. After Logan left, Julian returned to the study. Jasmine was already there, reviewing the trace log. He's carrying a burner phone, she said. Julian froze.
You're sure? I picked up the signal. Same frequency the marble vase bug used. It's paired to a masked relay. Julian felt the world shift under his feet. He sat down, hard. It wasn't just Evelyn. Logan was in it too. That night, Julian sat alone in his office. The moonlight poured across the floor like spilled silver. In front of him was a photo, one taken years ago. Julian and Logan, arms slung over each other's shoulders, standing in front of their first office space. Behind them, a whiteboard with wild scribbles and dream numbers. Julian picked it up, stared, then quietly turned it face down. The next morning, the trap deepened. With Jasmine's help, Julian created a clone folder on the company's cloud, a near-perfect replica of the prototype architecture. He embedded a hidden tracer code that would trigger the moment someone attempted unauthorized access. Miss Thelma adjusted the office schedule to ensure Evelyn and Logan had unmonitored moments, just enough rope to hang themselves, and then they waited. On Thursday, Evelyn forgot her scarf and came back inside. 20 minutes later, the decoy folder pinged. "She's copying it again," Jasmine whispered. An hour later, a second signal fired, this time from Julian's office terminal. Jasmine's eyes widened. "It's Logan. He's using the admin access," she added. "He thinks it's the real version." Julian leaned in. "And where is it going?" Jasmine traced the relay. "Frankfurt again." "But the IP after that?" "Hillsborough." Julian's jaw clenched. "Only one person I know lives in Hillsborough." Jasmine looked up. "Logan?" Julian didn't need more time. He had enough. Enough to see what he hadn't wanted to see. Enough to accept what Jasmine had already understood. Sometimes, betrayal wears a familiar face. That evening, Julian stared out at the backyard, arms crossed. Jasmine came out beside him, quiet as always. "I know it hurts," she said. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "He was like family. I know. He saw everything. Helped me build everything." Jasmine looked at him, her voice soft. "And that's why he knew exactly how to break it." Julian nodded slowly, his voice low, steady. "Tomorrow we end this." The house looked calm, too calm. The breakfast table was set. Fresh tulips bloomed in a ceramic vase. Evelyn Blake stood at the counter in a dove-grey dress, slicing peaches and humming along to a soft jazz playlist. Julian Carter watched her from the doorway. He knew that smile now, not affection, performance. Rehearsed, refined, and perfectly timed. "Big meeting today?" she asked sweetly. Julian nodded. "Just a quick overview with the legal team. Want me to bring dinner later?" He hesitated, then smiled. "That would be nice." Across the kitchen, Jasmine sat at the breakfast nook, head tilted over her tablet, pretending to scroll through cartoons. But what she was really doing, monitoring the interceptor grid wired through the walls overnight. 2 pings. Both active, one in the guest room, one in the study. "They're listening now," Jasmine whispered through her Bluetooth mic. "She's checking the folder again." Julian stirred his coffee calmly. "Good to know." That afternoon, Julian made the final move. He called Logan Pierce. "I need both of you here tonight," he said. "There's something important." "About the company?" "Both of us?" Logan asked, surprised. "You'll understand soon," Julian replied. He hung up before either of them could ask more. The trap was set. Behind the scenes, Jasmine and Miss Thelma moved like clockwork. They wired the dining room and study with hidden cameras, audio triggers, and device decoys. Every USB port was replaced with a duplicate feeding directly into a sandbox environment on a locked drive. Jasmine installed a voice-activated recorder inside the chandelier. Even the wine glasses were calibrated to catch sound reflections. By 6:30 p.m., everything was ready. At 6:58 p.m., Evelyn arrived. Elegant. Charming. Too perfect. She kissed Julian on the cheek and adjusted his lapel. "You seem tense," she said. "Just business," he replied. Moments later, Logan stepped through the front door in a tailored navy blazer, holding a bottle of Pinot.
"Hope I'm not interrupting date night," he joked. Julian smiled. "Not at all."
"Let's eat." Dinner was served in the glass atrium. Sunset bathed the table in amber streaks. They talked about stock prices, travel plans, foundation events, but beneath the surface, every word was being recorded. Every glance, every hesitation, every flicker of uncertainty. Julian leaned back, swirled his wine. "I've made a decision," he said. Both Evelyn and Logan looked up. "I'm naming the new encryption protocol after my father, the Edward cipher." Evelyn blinked. "You never mentioned that." "Just decided last night." Logan shifted in his chair. "That's quite the shift." Julian's voice was calm. "I've also asked the FBI to audit the prototype's digital pathway." A pause. Heavy. Evelyn's smile faltered just slightly. "That seems dramatic," she said. Julian met her eyes. "Or overdue." From the hallway, Jasmine watched it all unfold on her tablet. "They're panicking," she whispered. Miss Thelma stood beside her, arms crossed. "Good," she murmured. "Let them stew." Back at the table, Evelyn set her glass down. "Julian, I think we should speak privately." "Why?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Something you don't want Logan to hear?" Logan cleared his throat. "Maybe this isn't the time." "No," Julian interrupted. "I think it is." He stood, gestured toward the study. "Both of you, come with me." They followed him in, confused but compliant. Julian reached into his pocket and clicked a remote. The screen on the wall lit up. Footage began to play. Evelyn, in the guest room, uploading files. Logan, at Julian's terminal, inserting a USB drive. Timestamps, angles. Unmistakable. Evelyn's face went pale. Logan stepped back. Julian turned. "I trusted you. I let you into my home. My company. My life." Evelyn's smile was gone. Her voice dropped an octave. "You think you've got everything figured out?" Julian stepped closer. "I think I've got enough." The study doors opened. 2 plainclothes FBI agents entered. Badges raised. "Evelyn Blake, Logan Pierce. You're under investigation for conspiracy, corporate fraud, and federal cybersecurity violations." Neither resisted. As the cuffs clicked into place, Jasmine stepped into the room. Silent. Still. Watching. Evelyn locked eyes with her, furious. "It was you," she hissed. Jasmine didn't flinch. "You should have been more careful where you put your microphones." Later that night, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Julian sat in the study, the same untouched glass of orange juice from weeks ago beside him. He didn't drink it, just stared at it. Then he looked out the window. Jasmine was in the backyard under the stars. Not playing, not coding, just sitting. Existing, safe. He walked out and joined her. "You saved me," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "You saved yourself," she replied. "I just told the truth." He sat beside her, eyes soft. "That's all it ever takes, isn't it?" Jasmine smiled faintly. "Sometimes." And in that moment, Julian realized something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Not because the danger was over, but because someone had finally listened. 3 days had passed since Evelyn Blake and Logan Pierce were arrested. But inside the Carter estate, peace was still a stranger. Julian Carter sat in his study, surrounded by files, devices, and fragments of shattered trust. He knew Evelyn hadn't worked alone. Not really. The recordings, the payments, the burner phones, they were part of something bigger, something older, something hiding in plain sight. That morning, Special Agent Whitaker called. His voice was steady, professional. "We found a trail." Julian leaned in. "I'm listening. Offshore accounts. Secondary shell companies.
Someone's been moving money under your foundation's name. Julian's hand tightened on the phone. My name? Yes, sir. Vanessa set it up.
But she had help, internal help, on your board. Possibly more than one person. Julian felt the weight of the betrayal settle in his chest like a stone.
Do you know who? We have one strong lead. We need your permission to dig deeper. Julian exhaled. You have it. After the call, Julian didn't speak for a long time.
He just stared at a photo frame on his desk, a picture of him, Evelyn, and Logan at a foundation gala. He turned it face down. Then he walked downstairs.
Jasmine was already at the dining table, surrounded by notes, receipts, hand-drawn maps. She didn't look up. There's more, she said.
Julian nodded. I know. Together they laid out what they had, a map of donors, staff, travel records, emails. At the center was a name Jasmine couldn't shake. Margaret Green. She wasn't loud, never controversial.
But she had access, and she'd chaired the scholarship review board the year the biggest funds disappeared. She gave me a cupcake once, Jasmine said. At the gala last year, Julian blinked. A cupcake? Pink frosting. Looked homemade. He looked at her carefully.
You remember everything, don't you? Only the things that don't make sense. Later that day, Agent Whitaker arrived at the estate with more evidence. He and Jasmine reviewed the financials side by side, encrypted spreadsheets, metadata logs, cross-border transfers. Margaret Green authorized 3 of these transactions, he said. Julian folded his arms. She was part of our founding trust. She helped build the scholarship pipeline. She also signed off on a payment to a shell company, tied to Vanessa's offshore firm, Whitaker replied. Julian's face darkened. She knew. That night, the storm came, not the kind with rain. The kind that hits your conscience when the lights go out. Julian sat in his office, fingers steepled. Jasmine walked in with a mug of cocoa. You okay? She asked. He didn't answer. I'm just trying to decide what hurts more, he said finally. That she lied, or that I didn't see it. Jasmine sat down across from him. You're not the one who's supposed to see everything. Julian raised an eyebrow. Oh? That's my job, she said softly. The next morning, they called Margaret Green to the estate. She arrived on time. Wore a pale blue suit. Pearls, neutral lipstick. She smiled like a grandmother. But her eyes never blinked too long. Julian offered her tea. She declined. We're conducting an internal audit, he said calmly. Of course, she nodded. Due diligence. Jasmine slid a file across the table. This is a record of your approvals, she said. Margaret's fingers hovered over the paper, then lowered. You've been busy, she murmured. Julian leaned forward. You signed off on 3 overseas transfers. Margaret looked up slowly. Vanessa said they were private grants. For who? Jasmine asked. She never told me. But you signed anyway. A pause. Margaret exhaled. My sister was dying. Vanessa offered help. It felt harmless. It wasn't, Julian said, voice tightening. You helped her steal from children. Margaret didn't cry. But her hands shook. I'll resign, she whispered. Jasmine looked her in the eye. You'll speak publicly, and name every person she used. Margaret stared at her. Then, slowly, nodded. That evening, the press conference was held in a modest community auditorium. No suits, no spotlights. Just a podium and a seal. Margaret Green stepped forward and told the truth. She named names. Detailed how Vanessa had manipulated guilt, illness, and old loyalties. When she stepped down, the room fell silent. Then one clap echoed from the back. It was Jasmine, and slowly, others joined. Back home, Julian stood in the doorway watching her. You didn't have to clap, he said. She didn't have to tell the truth either, Jasmine replied. The next morning, the headlines rolled in. Whistleblower girl exposes billionaire espionage ring. Julian Carter cleans house. Foundation turns a corner. Justice born from silence. But inside the estate, Jasmine and Julian just kept working. No fanfare, no speeches, just the quiet determination to fix what had been broken. And for the first time in years, Julian looked at the world around him and thought, maybe we haven't lost everything after all. The headlines faded. The reporters moved on. But inside the Bennett estate, the real work was just beginning. Julian Carter sat at the long dining table, surrounded by files, post-it notes, and half-drunk cups of coffee. Opposite him sat Jasmine, barefoot, hair tied back, tablet open beside a notebook filled with bullet points written in her tiny, precise handwriting. They weren't talking about damage control, they were talking about rebuilding. Julian rubbed his temples. How do you rebuild trust when it's been gutted from the inside? Jasmine didn't look up. You start by telling the truth, loudly and consistently. Julian glanced at her. You've got quite the voice for someone so quiet. She smiled faintly. I only speak when people are finally ready to listen. They started with a list. A real one this time, not donors or staff, but principles. What the Bennett Foundation was supposed to stand for before the rot took hold. Education, transparency, inclusion, courage. Jasmine added one more. Accountability, she said. Julian nodded slowly. Yes. Especially that. At the next board meeting, Julian stood in front of his executives, clear-eyed and grounded. He didn't talk about share prices. He didn't mention optics. He said 5 words. We failed the people first. Silence fell. Then he laid it out. The new direction. A public audit. A third-party oversight committee. Monthly community reports. Youth advisory panels. And at the center, one unlikely voice. Jasmine Carter. She doesn't have a degree, someone whispered. She doesn't need one, Julian replied. She has a compass. The vote was unanimous. Jasmine would co-lead a new initiative called the Truth Transparency Project. Back at the estate, Julian found her sitting in the garden with a binder in her lap. He handed her a pin silver, engraved with the Foundation's original crest. This was designed the year we launched, he said. She took it carefully. Why are you giving it to me? Because you remember what we forgot. They started small, a visit to a middle school in south-central LA. The playground was cracked. The library had 3 working computers. Jasmine sat with the kids, not above them, beside them. She asked questions, took notes, listened. Julian watched from a bench, something soft breaking open inside him. He hadn't felt hope like this in years. Over the next month, they traveled up and down the coast in a rented SUV. No press team, no luxury jets, just a map and a mission. Small towns, underfunded schools, forgotten corners. Jasmine met with students, teachers, even janitors. Everyone had a story. Everyone wanted to be seen. In a rural school outside Bakersfield, a boy named Andre tugged on Julian's sleeve. You're the man from the news, right? The one with the glass tower? Julian crouched beside him. That's me. Andre's eyes widened. You came here? I came to see you, Julian said. Andre looked down at his old sneakers. Nobody ever does. Julian glanced at Jasmine. She nodded. Well, he smiled. This won't be the last time. That night, back at the estate, Jasmine walked into the study with a folder. What's this? Julian asked. She opened it. Inside were policy suggestions, new partner screenings, a hotline for whistleblowers, and an idea she'd handwritten at the bottom. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure no one else gets hurt. Julian looked at her, then back at the folder. You know this means you're officially a troublemaker, right? She grinned. Good thing I've got a teacher who used to be one. They held a town hall the following week. No velvet ropes, no red carpets. Just folding chairs and open mics. Jasmine stood at the front, not as a symbol, but as a leader. I'm not here to impress you, she said. I'm here to listen. And to make sure people like me, kids like me, never get shut out again. A woman in the back stood up, tears in her eyes. My granddaughter is 9, she said. I hope she grows up to be like you. Later that night, Julian found Jasmine sitting by the fire pit in the backyard. She had a blanket over her shoulders and a paperback in her lap. He sat beside her. You okay? She nodded, then hesitated. Do you think people can really change? Julian looked out into the dark. I think people can choose. That's what matters. Jasmine exhaled. The sky above them glittered with quiet stars, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't watching for danger. She was watching for what came next. 3 days after Margaret Green's confession made headlines, the storm seemed to pass. Talk shows praised the courage of a girl who spoke truth to power. Editorials called Julian Carter's leadership a model for corporate accountability. But inside the Carter estate, there was a silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. Julian stood by the window of his study. Morning sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. In his hand was a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo, Evelyn Blake, standing beside a man in a dark suit. They were at a private airfield, shaking hands, on the back in red ink. She's not done, and she's not alone. Julian felt the air in the room shift, cold, heavy. He picked up the landline. Get me Agent Whitaker, now. Minutes later, Whitaker's voice came through. We were afraid of this, he said. Julian tightened his grip. Who's the man in the photo? Name's Raymond Ellis. Former NSA contractor. Black hat for hire. Disappeared from records 5 years ago. And now he's working with her? Looks like it. If Ellis is involved, we're no longer dealing with corporate espionage. Julian's jaw clenched. I want security doubled around Jasmine. She's too close now. At that exact moment, Jasmine was sitting in the local library, hunched over a table under flickering lights. Around her were printed pages, foundation donor lists, and old fundraising programs. She had circled 3 names. One stood out. Harland Ellison, a major donor. Photographed with Evelyn 3 years in a row. Owned several shell companies tied to offshore holdings. Something didn't sit right. Jasmine tapped the table deep in thought. That's when she noticed it. Across the street, a black SUV parked. Not running, no movement inside, but it was watching. She froze, her breath shallow. Then slowly, she gathered her papers and dialed Julian. Stay on the line, he said immediately. Find a public place. She moved fast, down the sidewalk 2 blocks away, into a gas station. Pretended to browse the candy aisle. I'm here, she whispered. Good, Julian said. Stay there. I'm sending a team. Back at the estate, panic met precision. Julian barked orders. Security detail rerouted. Cameras activated. Miss Thelma started scanning entry logs for tampering. Jasmine returned home under escort, her eyes calm, but her knuckles white. She laid out her notes across the dining table. Julian stood beside her, staring. It wasn't just about Evelyn anymore, or Logan, or Margaret. This web went deeper. Donors, shell companies, politicians, and at the center, Vanessa Blake. That night, Agent Whitaker met Julian and Jasmine in a secure facility near Culver City. No windows, 1 round table, 1 projector. He clicked the remote. Images flashed across the wall. Evelyn. Logan, Raymond Ellis, Harland Ellison. Then a location. Grand Junction, Colorado, Whitaker said. Private data facility. No listed owner.
but registered to an Ellison-controlled entity. Jasmine's voice was quiet but firm. "What's in the server farm?" Whitaker hesitated.
If we're right, blackmail, audio, video, documents, everything Vanessa collected, not just to hurt Julian, but to control everyone. Julian's face darkened. She doesn't just want revenge, he said. She wants leverage. The next day, Whitaker prepared a federal warrant. Jasmine returned to the estate alone, tasked with prepping digital tools, but something pulled her toward the West Wing. Evelyn's old study. She hadn't been inside since the arrest. Dust hung in the air like forgotten secrets. She walked the perimeter. Something about the bookshelf didn't sit right. One leather-bound book stuck out a half-inch further than the others. She pulled it. Click. A hidden door opened. Jasmine's breath caught. Behind it, a narrow corridor. She turned on her phone's flashlight. At the end of the passage, a locked cabinet. She picked the latch with a hairpin skills learned from surviving group homes, not computer science class. Inside, a hard drive, and a thin red folder labeled "For Insurance." She ran back to Julian. They spread the contents across his desk. Photos, USBs. A handwritten note. Jasmine read aloud, "If you're reading this, I'm already gone, but I never played without a backup plan. And you, Julian, were always predictable." Julian didn't blink. "She left this on purpose," he muttered. "To remind me." One file made Jasmine go pale, a video of Evelyn speaking into a camera, talking to someone off-screen. "She's smart, that girl," Evelyn said, almost amused. "But kids always think justice is clean. That's what makes them dangerous." Jasmine looked away. Julian stared at the screen. "She was planning this even before I brought you home." He turned to Jasmine. "She always knew who the real threat was." That night, Julian stood at the edge of the garden, watching Jasmine sit under the old oak tree. She wasn't scared. She was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in his life, Julian realized something terrifying and beautiful. The person he brought home to protect was the one protecting him all along. The sky above Los Angeles darkened earlier than usual, as if the city knew something was coming. Inside Julian Carter's private jet, Jasmine sat buckled beside him. Her notebook rested on her lap, filled with scribbled notes, code fragments, and names. She stared at the pages, then closed the book. She didn't need to look anymore. She knew the plan. Their destination, Grand Junction, Colorado. Inside a nondescript concrete building, nestled between two storage depots, was a private server farm. No company logo, no signage. But Agent Whitaker's intel was clear. This was where Vanessa Blake had stored her real power. Not wealth, not weapons, information, blackmail files. Audio, video, digital dossiers designed to outlast careers, reputations, even jail time. On the ground, a federal team had already gone dark. Inside a mobile command van, Whitaker clicked through images, surveillance photos, blueprints, power grids. "You two are with me," he told Julian and Jasmine. "We go in silent, head for the central node, secure the drive. Extract and upload to the FBI mainframe." Jasmine nodded, no fear in her eyes, only focus. They entered through the side loading dock, dressed in black utility jackets. Inside, the server hall buzzed with quiet menace. Rows of machines blinked like 1,000 tiny eyes. Then, the final door. Julian entered the code Evelyn once used. The lock hissed open. And there she was, Vanessa Blake, standing in the center of the room. Her grey suit immaculate, her expression calm, almost serene. Jasmine stepped forward. Vanessa's lips curled into a slow smile. "I was wondering when the child would show up." Julian spoke first. "You underestimated her." Vanessa turned. "Don't flatter yourself. Everything you built your company, Your image was mirrors and masks. I just pulled the curtain back." Whitaker gave the silent signal. His agents fanned out, guns holstered, but ready. Vanessa didn't flinch.
"I backed everything up," she said. "Even if you take this server farm, there's a copy waiting offshore." Jasmine stepped forward. "You're right," she said.
"We can't stop what you stored." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you doing here?" Jasmine held up a USB drive. "Delivering your insurance file."
"The one you hid behind the cabinet." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You didn't." "Oh, we did," Julian said, "and it's going live in 10 minutes. The agents moved.
Vanessa was cuffed before she could blink. She didn't struggle, but her smile faded.
"Just enough. Tell me," she hissed at Jasmine. "What does it feel like?" "To be a pawn they let play hero?" Jasmine met her eyes without blinking. "I'm not a pawn." Her voice was quiet, firm.
"I'm the reason you're done." In the command van, Jasmine plugged in the drive. Progress bar, 6%, then 21%, then 74%. Agent Whitaker watched it crawl upward. Julian stood behind Jasmine, hand on her shoulder.
"You were incredible," he whispered. She exhaled.
"She almost won." Julian shook his head. "But she didn't. Because of you." The next morning, headlines exploded. "Whistleblower girl brings down $1 billion blackmail ring." Julian Carter's fiancée charged in espionage case. Justice unfolds at Bennett Foundation. But inside the boardroom, Julian's tone was simple and clear. "We don't go back to the way things were," he said. "We move forward, with honesty." He gestured toward Jasmine, seated beside him in a neat grey blazer and jeans. She saw what we refused to see. And because of her, we're still standing. Applause erupted. She didn't smile for attention, but she did sit up straighter. A week later, they stood together at a community garden reopening in south-central LA. Children played. Volunteers planted sunflowers. Jasmine walked with a blanket over her shoulders and a notebook in her hands. Julian joined her quietly. "You okay?" She nodded. "I still hear her voice sometimes." Julian looked down. "Vanessa's?" "She said justice isn't clean." He paused. "She was right," he said. "But you still chose it." She looked at him, her voice steady. "I'm not done." "Good," he smiled. "Neither are we." That night, Jasmine handed him a new folder. Proposals for youth boards, open audits, whistleblower protection, and one final note written in her familiar scrawl. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just a whisper that someone finally listened to. Julian stared at the line for a long time, then looked at her. "You know what this means, right?" She tilted her head. He smiled. "You've got homework." She grinned. "Good thing I'm a straight-A student." The darkness outside was quiet now. Not empty, not fearful. Just still. Because sometimes peace doesn't come from winning the war. It comes from knowing you stood your ground. And changed the world anyway. This story reminds us that integrity still matters even when the world tells you otherwise. Julian Carter had power, money, and love. Or so he thought. But when betrayal came from the people he trusted most, it wasn't anger that saved him, it was choosing truth. And beside him stood a child, Jasmine, only 9 years old, who never raised her voice but changed everything through quiet courage and relentless clarity. For older who've lived through broken promises, shifting values, and noisy headlines, this story says one thing clearly. Doing what's right doesn't always make the news, but it always leaves a mark. No matter your age, your past, or your scars, standing up for honesty, for the next generation, still means something, especially when the world seems to forget. Sometimes, the greatest change doesn't come from speeches or titles, but from listening to the small voice in the room, the one that refuses to be ignored.